Welcome to Uncovered Biblical History and Traditions, the channel dedicated to lost stories of the biblical past. Discover stories of pre-Christian historical roots, biblical legends, lost church history and forgotten historical characters of faith. It is very helpful if you hit the like, subscribe and share. Help build my channel and let's take a look together into these uncovered forgotten tales. What if everything you thought you knew about the birth of Christianity was incomplete? What if the most pivotal moment in early Christian history didn't happen in Jerusalem, Rome, or even Constantinople, but on a misty island at the edge of the known world? Today, we're diving into one of history's most extraordinary untold stories, the secret mission that allegedly brought Christianity to Britain decades before it reached most of the Roman Empire, led by a wealthy merchant who had cradled the broken body of Jesus Christ himself. This is the story of Joseph of Arimathea, the man who begged Pontius Pilate for Jesus' body, and his legendary journey to what ancient texts called the Sacred Isles of the West. But this wasn't a journey he made alone, and it wasn't a decision he made lightly. It began with a clandestine gathering in the bustling port city of Marseille, where scattered followers of the Way emerged from hiding to reunite under the protection of one of the most fearless leaders the early church had ever known. Picture Marseille in the 1st century, a cosmopolitan hub where merchants, philosophers, and refugees from across the Mediterranean converged. Among the usual chaos of commerce and trade, something extraordinary was happening. In hidden corners and private homes, long-separated followers of Jesus were finding each other again, drawn together by whispered messages and coded signs that only they would understand. At the center of this reunion stood Joseph of Arimathea, a man whose very presence commanded respect. This wasn't simply because of his wealth, though his successful business enterprises had certainly earned him influence throughout the region. Rather, it was his unique combination of analytical brilliance and unflinching courage that had made him invaluable during the most dangerous early years of Christianity. While other disciples had scattered when persecution intensified, Joseph had remained, operating as what some described as the power behind the throne, providing crucial guidance and protection when the movement was at its most vulnerable. Those gathering in Marseille had witnessed horrors that would haunt them forever. Roman persecution had reached levels of brutality that contemporaries compared to the worst atrocities in human history. Followers of Jesus were being crucified, burned alive, and fed to wild animals for the entertainment of crowds. Yet here they were, these survivors, drawn together once again by something stronger than fear, an unshakable conviction that their mission was far from over. Among all the remarkable figures who had gathered in Marseille, one stood apart with unique authority: Philip, one of Jesus' original 12 apostles. His presence transformed what might have been simply a reunion into something far more significant, a formal commissioning ceremony that would echo through the centuries. Philip's credentials were unquestionable. He was not only one of the 12, but substantial testimony confirmed his commission to evangelize Gaul. More importantly, he possessed something that no one else in that gathering could claim: the apostolic authority to consecrate others for sacred missions. And it was this authority that he was preparing to use in a ceremony that would forever change the trajectory of Christianity in the Western world. The consecration of Joseph of Arimathea has been misunderstood by many historians, who incorrectly interpreted it as Joseph's conversion to Christianity. But the biblical record makes clear that Joseph was already a disciple of Jesus long before this moment. The Jerusalem apostles had acknowledged him as Christ's follower during Jesus' final days. What was happening in Marseille was something far more significant than conversion: it was ordination. According to ancient church tradition, proper apostolic ordination required the laying on of hands by one of the original apostles. This wasn't merely ceremonial, it was understood to be the transmission of divine authority from those who had walked directly with Jesus to those who would carry his message to the ends of the earth. And remarkably, this wouldn't be the only time Philip would consecrate Joseph. Historical records suggest he performed this sacred ritual 3 times over a span of 30 years, with the final ceremony in 65 AD being particularly significant for reasons that would soon become clear. To understand the full significance of Joseph's consecration, we need to grasp the scope of Philip's own extraordinary ministry. Far from being a local religious leader, Philip had established himself as the acknowledged apostle of Gaul, the accepted head of the Gallic Christian church. But his influence extended far beyond even this impressive regional authority. Historical records reveal a man constantly in motion, traveling throughout the known world with his fellow apostles. The great Spanish churchman Isidore of Seville, writing in the early 7th century, described Philip as preaching to Gauls and barbarous neighboring nations, bringing light to those in darkness near the ocean. Cardinal Baronius's ecclesiastical annals speak of Philip adorning Upper Asia with the gospel, and traveling through parts of Scythia, preaching alongside the apostle Bartholomew. This wasn't the ministry of a man content to establish a single church and settle down. Philip was a pioneer, pushing the boundaries of the known world to plant the seeds of Christianity. Philip's eventual martyrdom at the age of 87 in Hierapolis, Phrygia, where he was stoned and crucified alongside his daughters, would come much later. But his vision for spreading Christianity to the uttermost parts of the earth was already fully formed when he laid hands on Joseph of Arimathea and commissioned him for what may have been the most ambitious missionary journey of the apostolic age. What happened next sounds like something from legend, but multiple historical sources confirm its basic outline. A delegation of British Druidic bishops had somehow learned of the gathering in Marseille and had travelled across the Channel specifically to extend an invitation to Joseph. But this wasn't a casual invitation to visit, it was an urgent plea for Joseph to return to Britain and teach Christ's gospel among the Celtic peoples. The political dimensions of this invitation were equally remarkable. Prince Arviragus, described as a noble leader of the Silures in Cornwall, had sent his own emissaries to enlarge the invitation. They offered not just a welcome, but lands, safe haven, and protection under Roman authority. This wasn't some random prince making a desperate political calculation. Arviragus was the son of King Cunoblinus, the historical figure who inspired Shakespeare's Cymbeline, and cousin to the renowned warrior-patriot Caradoc, known to the Romans as Caractacus. We're talking about the most powerful warrior kingdom in Britain, the royal Silurian dynasty from which the later English Tudor kings and queens would claim descent. When they extended this invitation to Joseph, they were offering him the protection and resources of what was effectively a sovereign nation. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this invitation was that it wasn't entirely unexpected. Joseph and Arviragus apparently knew each other already. Joseph's business enterprises had included mining operations in Cornwall and Devon, making him well known among both common folk and aristocracy throughout the region. For Jesus's great-uncle, as tradition holds Joseph to have been, this represented something more than a missionary opportunity. It was a homecoming. The tradition of Jesus's connection to Britain adds another layer of profound significance to Joseph's mission. According to ancient accounts preserved in multiple sources, Jesus himself had visited these islands, not as an adult teacher, but as a boy accompanying his great-uncle Joseph on business trips. Traditions from Cornwall, Devon, Somerset, Wiltshire, and Wales speak of the young Jesus walking these landscapes, absorbing their ancient wisdom and perhaps laying the spiritual groundwork for what was to come. More remarkably, some traditions suggest that after leaving India in his adult years, Jesus had journeyed to Britain during his silent ministry years and established a retreat there. At this sacred site, he allegedly built a simple wattle altar to God's glory, a humble structure that would become the focal point of one of Christianity's most significant foundations. The connections to India in these accounts are particularly fascinating. Ancient Indian texts, including the Vishnu Purana, mention Jesus dwelling among Indian wise men and visiting the Himalayan kingdom of Nepal. These same Indian religious teachers, according to tradition, were familiar with the British Isles and described them in their ancient books as the Sacred Isles of the West and Britashton, the seat of religious learning. When Joseph arrived in Britain with his 12 companions, his first destination was not a major population centre or royal court, but that simple wattle altar that Jesus had allegedly constructed years earlier. According to St. Augustine, writing much later to the Pope, this altar was still standing when Joseph arrived, a humble structure that had somehow survived the decades and was waiting to become the foundation of something unprecedented. Here, at this sacred site, Joseph of Arimathea built what many historians consider to be the first above-ground Christian church in the world. This wasn't a grand cathedral or imposing basilica, but a simple structure dedicated to God's glory in Jesus' name and to Mary, the mother of Jesus. Yet its significance was immeasurable. It represented the first permanent Christian sanctuary in a land that would eventually become known as the Sacred Isle. What Joseph and his companions accomplished in Britain reverberates through history in ways that are still being discovered. Within a remarkably short time, Britain had gained a reputation as the most hallowed ground on earth, commonly spoken of as the Sacred Isle, and recognized as the motherland of Christianity. This wasn't mere local pride or religious hyperbole, it was a recognition that something unprecedented had taken root in these misty islands. The Druidic priesthood, rather than resisting this new faith, provided what witnesses described as sympathetic ears to the gospel message. The shared trauma of persecution had created a bond between these refugees from Roman brutality and the Celtic spiritual leaders who understood the cost of maintaining faith under oppression. What emerged was not the destruction of one religious tradition by another, but a unique synthesis that would influence Christian expression for centuries to come. The story of Joseph of Arimathea's mission to Britain challenges our understanding of how Christianity spread in its earliest years. Far from being a purely Mediterranean phenomenon that gradually expanded northward, it suggests a much more dynamic and far-reaching apostolic strategy, one that recognized no geographical boundaries and was willing to plant the seeds of faith in the most remote corners of the known world. If you would like more information where to research this subject, check out my other videos and pause this image and look into these resources. I hope you enjoyed this forgotten biblical story. Leave a like, comment, share and subscribe. This is very helpful. Join me next time for another lost story of our biblical history. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.